Okay, so today I'm going to bring you classic Holy Shock build and some information about it. Now, I said in the past that I was going to stay away from Holy Shock builds until I got the ZG trinket, but I started thinking about it. This one specifically, I don't really need the ZG trinket to show it. It's a it's more about sustain than a big burst, and I have enough gear. Oddly enough, the best gear I have in all these clips you'll be seeing is my tier 1. The rest of my gear is all dungeon gear or like honored with war song and crap like that. Like storm pikes, double lore keeper, and dark moon fair necklace. Maelstrom card, and briarwood. So I guess not really much dungeon, mostly like turn-in stuff. So like, oh, I guess I have the AV shield. But the point is, like, any of you guys can get this gear. So what kind of sets this build apart between the bursty Shockedin and the PvP healer? The PvP healer, this has benediction, improved judgment. So it's really about spamming your judgments to get more damage out. And improved seal of righteousness. Even though it only adds to your flat on Elysium, flat spell power, it's still a nice significant damage boost. Um, it's kind of better for world PvPing 1v1ing and stuff. Like you can still get 31 holy, so people will still take you to raid and stuff. But you can kind of, you don't have to rely on other people as much, and that's what I like about it. I mean, you could say the same thing about Holy Reckoning, but the problem with the Holy Reckoning is you do take a minor hit to your PvE healing, where this one you pretty much don't. So that's the trade-off you make. And then compared to the Shockedin build, um, the bursty Shockedin that goes 18 in ret, this one's less gimmicky because the Shockedin really relies on the opponent not PvP trinking out of the stun, not being an orc and resisting it, or not being like a mage. Because you really got to get the double seal command bomb combined with the meteor. And also it's like use your divine favor, meteor, and stun. So you're using all these different abilities and you really need them to all land. So if they all land, your holy pally, you just blew someone up for like 4.4k. Sweet, but it's still pretty gimmicky. You gotta have a lot of things not get resisted and etc. So this one, it allows you to do decent damage over time and not rely on one wombo combo, or like you don't have to have the ZG trinket, for example. Like I still think it's worth getting, and on tier 2 is still really good, but you could probably get away with doing a tier 1 build like I'm using in here and be pretty effective. Since it's not super gimmicky, I actually think it's a really good dueling spec too, because like the bursty Shockedin, if they figure a way to sustain through your big burst combo, you're going to be a little bit vulnerable after that. Whereas this is like, I mean, there's no real trick to getting past it, and it actually duels really well. It's one of the best dueling specs in the game that doesn't use Reckoning. So I mentioned that this isn't the best spec for group PvP, even though it's really good, because you are trading some group abilities out, like improved concentration and cooldown on your stun. That's really nice for group fighting for more single target damage. But that being said, it still plays basically the same way. When you go into PvP, you should take off if you're in an organized group, you should take off all your spell power rings and put on plus healing rings. You should take off whatever spell power cloak you have and put on like Hide of the Wild. And you're still basically top near top tier at pre-made healing spec. I mean, you lose a little bit, but I mean, your teammates might not notice. So, some weaknesses to this build. So, I'm talking about how it's good in world PvP, but something you have to compensate for is your damage is a bit low. I mean, it gets pretty high with tier 2 in Lockamere. It does actually get pretty high, but before then it's a little bit low. And you're vulnerable to the enemies. Like, in one drawn out fight, you'll kick a lot of people's asses. Like, you'll beat hunters, often warlocks, maybe even Ellie shamans. But what they're gonna try to do to you is they're going to try to reset on you. Now you do have Holy Shock to kind of help with resets. If they're drinking kind of far away from you, you can shock them. But you really want to minimize getting kited, and you want to minimize resets. So what's really, really good is the Skullforge Reaver. And I would say the Skullforge Reaver is so good that I wouldn't really bother trying to, if you're going to do this spec, I wouldn't bother with a Deathbringer. Because like Prot Reckoning, like one-handed Reckoning, it totally makes sense to get a Deathbringer. Or Iron Foe, for example. But I wouldn't bother with Iron Foe or Deathbringer unless you get an easy grab at it. The Skullforge Reaver covers your weakness. You don't necessarily need that tiny bit of more damage. You need that dot to stop them from getting the resets, because you can wear them down with this. The next thing you can do to compensate for your weaknesses is get something like Ungoro Poison, which can put a dot on them. But like better than anything is Frost Oil. Especially if you already had the Skull Force, because you already got your dot. Now you need something to slow them, to make their kiting a lot harder. I mean, it's good on multiple levels, because like, let's say you put the Frost Oil on someone and they're trying to separate from you because they're planning to bandage, and it takes a long time to get out of range of your Holy Shock, for example. It's just good. Like, while you're healing, they're spending more time running in one direction, and they can't get enough distance to get their spell off on you or something, like a Shadow Bolt. So, yeah, Frost Oil's pretty much a must. Maybe Shadow Oil if you get enough spell power. But I wouldn't be messing with Shadow Oil until I had like full tier 2 in Lockamere. Okay, and another thing, just backtrack talking about weapons for a second. This is one of the few builds you don't need a slow delay weapon. I mean, it doesn't really do anything for you. You don't have command and you don't have reckoning. So if you're gearing up and you just can't get a slow weapon, you might want to consider this build. Using procs with this build is still pretty good. You do not have reckoning, so it's not insanely good, but this build uses Seal of Righteousness, so you still get double proc chance, and you're kind of tanky, so over time procs can be like, relying on procs just works better with long duration fighting builds than like one and dones. A one and done Holy Shock burst would want to use like Fallen Star and Zandala Heron Charm, and technically it's not in the game yet, so you guys haven't seen me use it, but if you want to do Ret Reckoning and you want to blow someone up, you want to use like Earth Strike or Slayer Crest or something. Just pop it when you have your counters and just annihilate them. But this build, over time, these procs are really, really strong. So Heart of Wormthalic's pretty good, and same with Maelstrom if you don't have the ZG trinket. Just like the rings before, when you go into organized PvP, you want to take off your proc items like Maelstrom trinket probably. I mean, maybe not, but you probably want to replace it with plus healing or anti-CC like your PvP trinket. So a lot of the stuff I'm saying, like, it really applies for you running around like solo farming thorium or something, or dueling someone. In group PvP, you pretty much want to just play as a dedicated healer. And then if you have no friends and you're pugging, you can throw on your spell damage and Maelstrom card, etc. Okay, so I'm kind of jumping around a bit because I'm going to go back to weaknesses because I did think of another one. Unless you're using the PvP gear, you really have no like cooldown reduction or 2 forms of CC. And oftentimes it's kind of hard to max out hit chance because most hit chance pieces go with attack power. So if you have precision, you'll most likely be missing 2 hit, and then that will make you have a 2% chance to miss the hammer or justice that you do have. Without hammer landing, you don't really have a good chance of healing yourself. I mean, you can holy shock, and you can hit the enemy, the life tap with iron circle, or it's all sorts of proc items. You can last to your next stun or your next bubble. But like hard CC, you don't have a lot of it, so it is kind of hard to use your mana if you don't use it wisely. Like I suggest using your stuns to heal yourself and using your poison procs, whatever you're carrying, to keep the enemy from resetting. But if you see a pretty good opening, you may not want to take it. Like if you think, man, maybe he's at 30%, maybe if I stun him now I can kill him, maybe not take it, because if it fails and they survive, it's going to be a long time, and if you're low, you're going to die. So just play it safe and try to use poisons to keep them in combat. And speaking of things I forgot to mention the PvP gear is really good for this spec once it upgrades into spell power, because it's int stam spell power. And some crit in there is fine because you do actually melee a lot with this spec. So yeah, really tier 1, tier 2, and late game PvP gear all work really good with 31, 13, 7. I don't really have anything else to say. I think it's kind of self-explanatory. It's a sustained DPS that uses procs and spell damage. It can raid, it can 1v1. It's good. So I guess I'll just play some music, finish this out. Days full, guys, and good luck. In the name of God, in the name of God, in the name of God, we come to